Hey guys, my name's Gray, and I'm just a giant 90s kid with a burning need to react to this song since the passing of the legendary Jason David Frank. He was such an awesome figure for so many of us 90s kids growing up, and it's so sad to hear that he passed away so recently. And if you want to see my thoughts on why that's affected me so deeply, feel free to check out this video here. Should be up here somewhere. I grew up obsessed with the Power Rangers. I mean, like, this cup, well, half an egg cup now. My roommate managed to very ungraciously destroy it yesterday. 30 odd years I'd had it. Thankfully, she's managed to redeem herself by making me a sweet-ass tea in my favorite cup. So, you know, I haven't had to throw her out the house yet for this transgression. So I was supposed to be reacting to Ghost Love Score today because that one won the poll, the last poll that I did on the channel. But at the last minute, the singer from my Nightwish tribute band said she'd love to be a part of that, and I thought, well, that sounds like a fantastic idea. So we're waiting to see if our schedules line up and we can get that sorted. In the meantime, hopefully, the Mighty Power Rangers theme will have to suffice. I suppose this is going to be more of an analysis video because so many of you guys seem to have a distinction between my more verbal type way of expressing my thoughts and feelings compared with, oh my god, it's a song, what the fuck, I've never heard that before type reaction. Whatever floats your boat, man. Like, this is the way I react listening to stuff. Let's get on and check out this badass song. Here we go. It sounds so good already. Oh, that sounds good. So I know we've just got started, but I gotta stop it because right away, there's a million things I can talk about that's going on here. If you want to see me react to the rest of the song and just get on with it, feel free to click ahead to the next chapters because this is probably gonna take a while. First of all, it just sounds fucking epic. That's a proper classic rock type arrangement and it's got all the energy and all the balls that you would hope it to have. It's not like some of the theme songs that you get out of the 80s where they're still kind of cheesy, lovey-dovey type sounding things that are pretending to sound badass. This one's just a straight up classic rock number, and it's awesome. We're in the key of E minor by the sounds of it, and it's just pedaling on that root chord with a proper chuggy palm muted. It's just an awesome way to start the song. The riff is very to the point with its construction, like very basic, very classic rock, almost a stereotype, if you will, but it's surprisingly complex in its construction because at the end of it, you can hear it raises to that, I guess it's a flattened second chord. You go from the E5 power chord to the F5 power chord, and it just gives this really strange vibe because you don't expect that in a classic rock type song, even though it's quite commonly used. Gives it a kind of jarring, jumpy type quality, and that lines up well with the tone of what's probably coming visually with, you know, the Power Rangers, where it's just and what's really interesting about that riff is that's not a real guitar. That's definitely a MIDI guitar or played in on a keyboard or something like that. There are nuances that you hear with a real guitar player that are definitely not there. It sounds robotic, it sounds artificial, and the tone of it's quite interesting as a result. It makes it sound machine-like. The drums and bass are really basic, no questions about that. They're very straightforward, stock, kind of written by a guitar player or someone who's not quite a bassist or drummer type parts. To my ears, at least, they give that impression. They sound programmed, almost. Which works really nicely because it gives a lot of space for the real guitar to fit in around it and start to fill some of that sonic space afterwards. I'll get to that in a minute. It doesn't sound empty, even though it leaves a lot of room for other elements to come and fill in the mix. It's really cool and very cleverly done because you've got that raw power of that MIDI guitar riff with the impression of more power, but leaving room for growth. The bass itself is a really interesting thing because it doesn't go full, you know, pedal to the metal type vibe with the parts once it kicks in fully. It's doing more of a staccato kind of da-na, da-na-na, da-na-na, da-na-na on a note that's not the bottom octave on the bass guitar, which is interesting because you figure it would just go full out. And it doesn't. It stays somewhat reserved, somewhat tame, and again, it leaves room for growth through the next sections. If you go too full out, too quick, you've got nowhere to go in a song, and it just makes things boring, you know, when people tune out, they'd click off within seconds, otherwise it just, you need to leave some room for progression through the piece. Otherwise your riffs don't sound heavy, they just sound boring. The drums, on the other hand, though, they're going kind of balls to the wall with the cymbals. Like, that's really filling in that higher end, which, again, it kind of keeps the focus away from the mid-range, where the guitar starts to come in during the second half of this, and it doubles up the MIDI guitar effectively. That higher end being filled in with the cymbals constantly going, it fills things out sonically. And it works so nicely to just give this big, warm, full sound, with relatively minimal parts as well. It's very clever. It gives a shitload of energy to an already really high energy riff, which is impressive, because again, you could really run the risk of making this sound boring if you're not careful. It's almost Black Sabbath in style, where they kind of had a habit of bass plays what the guitar's doing, more or less. Guitar does what the vocals are doing, or the vocals do what the guitar's doing. Everything's working together in a unified way, kicking the crap out of that main riff. And yeah, that flattened second, I kind of associate with Sabbath to a degree as well. It's like the most heavy sounding combo of notes you can use next to like a flattened fifth, which is your typical doom heavy metal sounding thing. Like all good compositions, it works synergistically. The whole at the end of it is greater than the sum of the individual parts, even though this is a pretty basic arrangement. It's drums, bass, guitar, and a MIDI guitar so far, and a couple of sound effects. Like, it's about as basic as you can get. But making those elements work together to give a whole mix, to give the whole vibe of just all this energy coming at you, it takes skill. It takes deliberate, artistically used skill. And I'd like to say, the second guitar, when it comes in after everything kicks off, I'll show you where it kicks in if you haven't heard it yourself. Comes in after the drums. There. It's kind of a higher frequency sound. That's the second guitar, played by a real player. It's very interesting, because it's just doubling up the main MIDI guitar that we've already heard, but because of the difference in what you can do with a guitar, where you can slide around with pitches and things, as opposed to playing it in on a keyboard, it creates this kind of flamming, jumpy effect at the end of the piece, which I'll demo what I mean. You've got the MIDI guitar, played in on a keyboard. And you've got the real guitar played on a real guitar. And if you put them together, you can hear that flammy sound at the end, where they approach raising to that flattened second in a different way. So even though they're doubling up and doing the same thing, it does create this slight disturbance towards the end of the phrase before we get back to the start. And it just works really nicely. Again, it gives that jumpy, urgent feeling. Lots of activity, lots of energy, matches perfectly with the theme of the show, the vibe of the show, and it sets you up well as a viewer, especially as a kid, whether you pick up on it consciously or not, to receive that kind of content. It works great. It builds a ton of tension as well before the solo comes in, just to have that da-da-da, and then you're off with the next section that we're going to check out now. Let's move on. Epic part coming. Awesome. It's just a really, really cool solo. A fantastic little choice of riff. And so basic, yet so powerful. And that slightly artificial sound of it not being a real guitar, it lets it sit differently in the mix next to the regular guitar playing the power chords in the background. It just really makes it pop and come to life. And it's all about that with, songs and writing and mixing. You want different sonic qualities to fill in different areas, otherwise everything just sits in the middle and it sounds shite. So the rest of the arrangement's really interesting when we kick into the solo, because you figure it will all build and go, heavier and heavier, but it doesn't. It actually cuts back. All the rest of it just gives space for the solo to emerge. The guitar cuts back from the chugging and just plays straight, sustained power chords. Almost gives us like a relief, a sense of relief, and the ability to catch our breath after all the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, because it just gets monotonous after a while, even if you love heavy riffing. Having that space, having that relief, it just lets everything sit for a moment, especially as the lead guitar comes into the mix and takes focus. That section would not have worked as well if you kept pounding away on the rhythm guitar with the main solo having so much activity going on and taking up so much of our attention and focus in the front of the mix. The drums, they do basically the same thing. They're a bit more laid back. They lay off the cymbals. They still use them sparingly, filling in the high end, but they cut back to the hi-hat, which just sounds a little tamer. It gives us that little bit more of a sense of relief and space for the solo to cut through, and it allows things to pick up again later on when we get back to the heavy chugging. The bass is the most interesting part to me here, because it's already not doing classic rock just da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's very staccato, very reserved, it's holding back the energy in a reserved, deliberate, controlled way. Kind of gives me that impression of that old kind of joke of where there's two bulls on the mountain and there's a young one, there's an old one. And the younger bull, as the younger one does, he's kind of like, hey, we can run down that hill and go, grab one of the girls and whatever. And the older bull just says, no, we will stroll down and with them all. I feel that applies here. A lot of young guitar players and songwriters and things, when they're writing heavy rock riffs, they just go balls to the wall for the whole thing, and it makes for tedious sounding songs. You need some restraint, you need some light and shade, some soft and loud. If everything is all on all the time, nothing sounds all on. Unless you're Motorhead, in which case it works fine. That vibe I'm on about with the two balls, the bass is just very calmly and casually strolling between the root and the fifth, painting the illusion of some harmonic depth, but it's just straight power chords all the same. But again, gives us some relief, but keeps some movement going. It doesn't just drop back like the drums and guitar have. Works fantastically to keep that momentum. We don't lose energy here, even though everything cuts back and makes room for the lead guitar. It's a fantastic use of the bass to do that. If you've ever played in an amateur rock or metal originals band or anything like that, you'll know the tendency of those kind of less experienced players to just, I've got this heavy riff. Great, now I've got this heavy riff. Now I've got this heavy riff, and slap them all together. And you've got 7 minutes of a boring, tedious mess of a song that no one will give a shit to listen to because it's not well constructed. They're just different chunks of different bits of riff of, this sounds amazing, and this bit sounds great, and slammed together. And it doesn't make a cohesive unit of a song. It's something you've got to be very mindful of. This song in particular, it's very standard, very stock, other than the Midi guitar, which it's still a guitar. You know what I mean? It's still effectively 2 guitars, 1 set of drums, and a bass, making this massive sound. It's so easy to make that tedious or boring, even just 30 seconds in. So combine those elements and use them in a way that keeps things interesting, that keeps the power of that kind of, power. It keeps that riffiness, it keeps that heaviness, it keeps that energy, without just wearing out the listener. It's difficult to do in an effective manner. So to get all of that captured in a melodic kind of way where people can still hum the Power Rangers theme 30 years later, you can hum it, you can sing it. As not a rock or metal fan, it's catchy as fuck. It's incredibly well composed. It's deceptively simple, but very artfully done. So let's check out the rest of it.
They've got a power and a force that you've never seen before.
It sounds so good. It's like singing in a warm bath.
They've got the ability to morph and to even up the score. No one can ever take them down. The power lies on their side.
So we're back to the chuggy riffing. It feels nice and punchy again after all the space in the arrangement that was created to make room for the guitar solo. The drums are playing a bit more reserved, they're sitting with the hi-hat, they're not ramping back up to full-blown energy with hitting the cymbals constantly like they were at the start. It lets us focus on the new elements that are introduced. And that brings us to the vocals. They are classic rock, very, there's lots of attitude, there's lots of delivery and energy to it. It's incredibly snarly and cartoony. It sounds great, it sounds fantastic in this context. They're twangy, they're kind of borderline distorted without actually being very distorted, and they sit in the mix perfectly. I just love that. They've got a power and a force that you've never seen before. You imagine that with a broader they've got. It could sound kind of cool, but it probably sound terrible unless mixed really well. I love the harmony as well. It's really basic. It's just basically the next note up in the triad of the chord that they're, singing over. But it works and it rocks. It gives it this unity. It gives it this punch. It gives it this presence. It adds a lot of much needed harmonic depth because again, you're playing over straight power chord, straight root bass notes for the most part. There's not a lot else going on. You need that kind of depth. Otherwise it sounds boring really easily. Having that harmony, it just fills things in. It just gives this color. Pre-chorus is great. Again, gives lots of space leading up to the chorus, ready for that to really kick off and have a strong impact. It doesn't do anything crazy. The bass is doing its kind of rhythmic root and fifth type thing. And yeah, it just sounds great. It leads us nicely to the next section. And especially with that slide between the B and C chords just before the chorus, that chromatic. It builds tension. It builds energy. You're waiting on the edge of your seat for that chorus to kick off. I love it. Let's carry on. Fantastic chorus. The parts stay surprisingly tame though, considering how full-blown it seems to be going again. They leave a lot of room for that background guitar solo part to pop out around the main melody. The solo and the catchy but short and sweet vocal melody keeps our attention off of all the chugging that, is going on in the chorus that we've already heard. That would become incredibly tiresome to listen to again and again and again by this point in the song. So the fact that the main elements, the main focus, have so much space, they find the guitar solos, like, there's nothing highly active or complex going on there. It's dead simple melody. And the chorus, the Go Go Power Ranger, dead simple again. Real straightforward stuff. And it works great. Where the chorus ends is really interesting because it ends on an F major chord, which we're in the key of E minor. That's such a weird chord choice on the face of it, let alone to emphasize harmonies. Keeps things interesting. It refreshes you for going back round to the verse and effectively hearing it all over again. Brilliant elements. Really good. Again, they're making a lot out of relatively basic parts. Let's move on.
They know the fate of the world is lying in their hands. They know to only use their weapons for defense. No one will ever take them down. The power lies on their side. Go, go, Power Rangers! Go, go, Power Rangers! Go, go, Power Rangers! You mighty morphin' Power Rangers!
Other than some slightly different drum fills and a tiny bit of some extra guitar noises on the second pre-chorus, there's not a lot different from what we've already heard. And I would be very interested to know what the audience retention data is like on this video. In this day and age where you can just click off and watch something else instantly in the sidebar next to the video you're watching, I reckon that's the point where people get bored. When I do a cover of this song, and I will be doing a cover of this song, I'd be very interested to see what the data says on that cover, and if most of you guys just stop watching around the second verse. Because of the way it's constructed, there's just not a lot else going on. Doesn't mean it's bad by any stretch, but there's a reason they cut this down to 1 minute for the TV show intro. One thing I do love though, that's different, I love the kind of implied volume swell on the vocal harmonies on the second chorus at the end before the solo kicks in. I'm not sure what mixing techniques or effects or things like that they're using, maybe some phasing, maybe some flanging, I'm not sure. There seems to be an extra higher harmony in there as well, which just, again, it builds the song, it adds a nice element, just adds something new. It just sets it up nicely before the melodic and harmonic responsibility and focus of the song is handed off to a guitar for a change of pace. So let's check out the solo now. Here we go, let's do it. It's really basic for the first half of the solo. It's basically just playing the main chorus melody, the da 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 da, again and again and again, but in slightly different ways. It doesn't drift too far from it with the licks that it chucks in around it, and so obviously we're just kind of hearing summed up what we've heard already, which I think works nicely to set us up for the second half of the solo. But it does add some much needed variation, especially with it being such a human guitar performance. There's vibrato, there's bending, there's various different little bits of almost pinch harmonic type sounds. And things like that, little pops and squeaks of energy here and there that you get with the guitar playing, and it contrasts so nicely with most of the solo work, or all of it so far, being done by a MIDI, robotic, quantized type guitar. You do pick up on it as a listener, even if you're not paying attention, just that change in feel, that change in vibe. This one's obviously done by a human person with energy and feel. The other ones are just a really cool, high-energy, constructed melodic piece, and it's cool to be using those to contrast against each other in different sections of the song. It just keeps the punch of that main melody, but still allows the piece to move forward and progress. That takes us to the second half of the solo. The second half is where the classic rock shreddy guitar thing kicks in, and it's weird, because it's kind of gives the impression of being sloppy, even though it's clearly played by a very competent player. Like, it's frantic, it's not melodic, it's not highly structured, it's very loose, kind of bluesy in a way. But again, it contrasts so nicely with the rigid, quantized MIDI guitar solos that we've heard earlier, and that's the main thing that brings, is it just changes the energy up and shifts our focus away before taking us back to the chorus and the end of the song. Beautifully done and well played. Like, as a guitar player, it's well played. Even though it gives the impression of sloppiness, there's a difference between playing a part that sounds sloppy in a frantic, energetic way and just playing like shit. And he definitely, or she, is definitely in the former category with that here, for sure. Let's hear the end, shall we?
No one can ever take them down. The power lies on this side.
Gotta be done.
Go, go, Power Rangers! Go, go, Power Rangers! Go, go, Power Rangers! You mighty morphin' Power Rangers! Go, go, Power Rangers! Go, go, Power Rangers! Go, go, Power Rangers!
It's fantastic. Such a beautifully constructed, nice trip musically. Such a nice journey from start to finish. Fantastic use of the arrangement. This is one of my favorite bloody songs from that era. I, for one, find it really interesting as a rock guitar singer, whatever, musician, how it's used those kind of stock, basic rock type components, but made such an interesting piece out of it, you know? It's just cool to hear those basic building blocks put together in a unique way, and I think that's why this song has lasted so long in people's hearts and in people's minds. It does a wonderful job of showing how you can maintain, for the most part, energy and immediacy through a 4-minute song. Like, that's not a short song, it's not a long song, but that's not crazy short by any means. And it does keep that oomph for the whole damn thing, which is impressive. It's hard to do. And yeah, it still gives me goosebumps to listen to it 30 fucking years later. So thanks very much for joining me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all very soon for the next one. Take care till next time. Hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.